Welcome to Voices of the Community, which explores critical issues facing Northern California communities. We introduce you to the voices of community thought leaders and change makers who are working on solutions that face our fellow individual community members, neighborhoods, cities, and our region. This is George Koster, your host. This episode is part of our series exploring COVID-19's impact on nonprofits and small businesses in the San Francisco Bay Area. Back in April of 2020, when we decided to create this ongoing series on COVID-19's impact, first on nonprofits and then on small businesses in the San Francisco Bay Area, we, like you, had no idea how long the pandemic would go on and what the health and economic impact would be in our community. Going into 2021, the pandemic is now killing more people, shutting down more nonprofits and small businesses, along with wiping out the livelihoods of families, neighborhoods, and communities. We will continue to shine a spotlight on the nonprofits and small businesses that make up the fabric of our community, along with the founders and staff who are struggling to deal with the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on their operations, services, and sustainability until we can all get to the other side of the pandemic. Along the way, we will also share with you all the amazing solutions that our nonprofits, small businesses, foundations, and government leaders are working on to help us all get to the other side of the pandemic and come together to rebuild our communities with more economic, social, and environmental equality.
So I began to reach out to funders that were exclusively funding music on our side and similarly with them. And then we built that pool of available funds and immediately started distributing those funds in small grants to artists that were in need and continue to be in need. So that's been probably the biggest outcome of all of this in terms of direct support we were able to provide and are still providing. I just looked at the website, and at this point, there's almost $600,000 of aid fund that's gone directly to musicians. And unlike the musical grant program, this isn't for a project. This is really to, you read these stories, it's paying rent, paying for my child's medicine, paying utility bills. They're hard stories to read, and you just realize how deeply impacted so many people are through this. And while this is a small amount of aid, at least we felt this is something that's making a difference and continues to do so.
This is the Executive Director of InterMusicSF, Cory Combs. We wanted to host InterMusicSF because they are another one of our longtime performing arts organizations that is focused on the incubation and support of our musical artists. InterMusicSF is also participating in the Theater Bay Area's Performing Arts Work Relief Fund to help raise funds to support musical artists, just like Dancers Group for Dancers and Z-Space for Performing Artists. I'm joined remotely via Zoom by Cory Combs, the Executive Director of InterMusicSF. Thanks for being here, Cory.
Thanks so much for having me. Thrilled to be able to talk about InterMusicSF.
Well, and that brings me to why I wanted to have InterMusicSF on the show, because I feel, as we were saying a moment ago before we started, just InterMusicSF is another one of those really wonderful decades-old nonprofits that's out there and is an incubator of musical artists. So I would love it if you can kind of paint a picture for the audience as to who is InterMusicSF and all of your programs that you guys have been doing.
Thank you. I'd love to. InterMusicSF started in the 90s. There were three longtime friends who were lovers of small ensemble music and felt that larger organizations, say, that were doing symphonic music or opera or ballet, were getting lots of funding opportunities that maybe smaller ensembles weren't getting. And so they started this nonprofit as a support organization, not a presenter or something that was going to be more in the public eye. It was really to help these professional musicians start to professionalize their operations and find more opportunities. So it started out relatively small and primarily supporting string quartets as its impetus. And then as it grew, it started developing more opportunities and diversified their musical portfolio. And over the time, it went from San Francisco Friends of Chamber Music to where we are now, InterMusicSF, which really represents the wide breadth of music we support, which is jazz music, classical music, early classical music, modern, contemporary classical, world influence music. So, but all with the focus on the small ensemble. And we're by nature, as I mentioned, a support organization. So what that means is that we are fiscal sponsors. So there are artists that can join our program, and fiscal sponsorship at its outset is a little confusing, but essentially it allows these ensembles to, quote unquote, borrow our nonprofit status to fundraise. So they don't have to go through the bureaucracy and the challenge and the expense of founding their own nonprofit. But with us as their umbrella organization, they can apply for grants like the Zellerbach grant or NEA or others that might require fiscal sponsorship. In addition, we give them opportunities for professional development. We give free workshops, we help them write grants, and finally, if they're in our program, we try to find opportunities to promote them. And that might be through performance opportunities, or if they have performances coming up, we should make sure to provide outlets for them to get exposure. So we have about 100 different ensembles now under our fiscal sponsorship program, and that continues to grow each year. So some are very, very active in fundraising all the time, and others are, maybe sitting on a project and waiting a bit till the next opportunity comes. But it's a really great opportunity for me to have learned about all these amazing groups that are putting together music and recordings and educational programs. One of our board members calls it a three-legged stool. That's part one of that. Our second is the musical grant program, and we're in the cycle of that right now in terms of accepting applications. And the musical grant program, we are given a large bucket of, large relative, from organizations like the Hewlett Foundation, the Heller Foundation, for us to then re-grant out in smaller increments to musical ensembles. And so we each year give about $80,000 out to small groups through a competitive application process. They can apply as a jazz ensemble, you should do a recording, as a classical presenter, anything that might be, again, furthering reach and scope of small ensemble music in the Bay Area. And so we have our application is due on March 21st. And then we will later on in the spring have a panel get together and review all these applications, and we'll award about 22 projects. We're almost at about $1 million given out since this program started in about 2010. And then our most public program is SF Music Day. And that's the one that we get to kind of pull back the curtain, come out in front of the audience to tell a little bit more of our story in a more traditional setting in terms of audience and musicians interacting. And we take over the entire War Memorial, which is a San Francisco venue, beautiful historic venue, 4 stages, the Herbst Theater, the Green Room, and on the 2nd floor, and then 2 very modern venues on the 4th floor. And it's a full day of simultaneous performances on all 4 stages. And it's about, between 25 and 28 groups play 30-minute sets. And the idea is it's an informal introduction to small ensemble music from the Bay Area, and for listeners that may or may not be familiar with a lot of these artists. So they come and maybe have one group on their roster that they really know well, but then they can peruse the whole venue and see styles of music and artists that they have no exposure to previously. And so it's a free event by nature, and will always be a free event, funded by many generous organizations, both nationally and locally. And, we're just really thrilled to be able to present this music and to do it year after year. And so those are our 3 primary programs.
So much, of course, is in person, like Music Day, right? Where you have literally 4 stages going. How has COVID-19 impacted InterMusic's operations and your affiliates?
It's been dramatic. And when this first started about a year ago, when the shutdown started to happen, and a lot of our affiliates were turning to me and to us to say, what should I do? What can I do? What's going to happen? And of course, I was as confused and panicked as they were, because I was thinking about our own operations. And if they're worried, I'm worried, because, no one quite knew what was going to happen. And I knew a lot of much larger organizations were concerned. And I was talking to a lot of my peers and colleagues from other, as I said, bigger groups that were really not sure what to do. But almost immediately, what I noticed was there was a coming together at all levels, from the artists to the funders to the organizations, to immediately begin to navigate this very choppy water at the start. One of my affiliates, who is a great ally for us, Lisa Metzacapa, who's a bassist and composer, was an initial kind of organizer of nonprofits. And she just took this upon herself to say, the community needs to hear from you. So she said to us and to Center for New Music and to Mario Guarneri with Jazz in the Neighborhood to say, what can you all do to start this dialogue? And so essentially we started by surveying musicians to say, what is happening to you right now? There was at the moment, no funding that I had available to say, we can give aid funding or anything like that. And we turned to some large funders to say, what are you all doing? But at the moment, it was really just gathering data and collecting information. And the impact was massive. People were losing all opportunities for income with no real sense of how to change that. And then fortunately, as I continued to kind of turn over stones and think about what we could do, I realized that we were very well positioned as a support organization to pivot right away into finding ways to directly aid this community of artists and musicians. And through our network of nonprofits doing fiscal sponsorship, I was able to reach out to Theater Bay Area. I knew that they were starting the Arts Worker Relief Fund. That was at the moment when it started, really focused on theater workers in particular. Not exclusively so, but the outreach was probably by the nature of their organization being focused on theater, more directed towards that community. And so I said, can I help you with this? Can we help you fundraise? Can I help you by reaching out to musicians? And they welcomed InterMusic in. And also at that same moment, he thought it would be great to have a third part of this, which would be Dancers Group. Is another nonprofit of a similar size doing also kind of support work in the community. So the three of us combined forces and immediately started fundraising at all levels. So I began to reach out to funders that were exclusively funding music on our side and similarly with them. And then we built that pool of available funds and immediately started distributing those funds in small grants to artists that were in need and continue to be in need. So that's been probably the biggest outcome of all of this in terms of direct support we were able to provide and are still providing. I just looked at the website, and at this point, there's almost $600,000 of aid fund that's gone directly to musicians. And unlike the musical grant program, this isn't for a project. This is really to, you read these stories, it's paying rent, paying for my child's medicine, paying utility bills. They're hard stories to read, and you just realize how deeply impacted so many people are through this. And while this is a small amount of aid, at least we felt this is something that's making a difference and continues to do so. And our funders have been so generous with large donations and continued pledges. So it hasn't fixed everything, of course. People need to get back to work and need to get back to work as soon as possible, which maybe, knock on wood, is going to start happening. But at least we were able to help bridge the gap for many, many artists that needed some direct aid.
And how can folks continue to support InterMusic SF? So obviously you guys have been raising money, and the Performing Arts Worker Relief Fund is an amazing project into itself. But how can folks support you guys and also your affiliates?
Yeah. So if you donate to InterMusic SF, it helps us with all of our programs, and in particular, our musical grant program. We're able to bolster that available funding that we then turn back to artists, or say turn back to more professional development to help artists. And that's intermusicsf.org/support. And that takes us right to our donation page. If you want to learn more about our programming, you can just go to intermusicsf.org, and you'll also be able to find the support page there. And that will give you more of a picture of our full set of programs.
And so, Cory, over your years of working at InterMusic SF and working with all the affiliates, could you share with the audience perhaps one of your favorite stories of how InterMusic SF has supported music and you feel like its impact in youth and families and musicians in our community?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I have been in the Bay Area now for a while. My wife and I came out here in the 90s and immediately started meeting so many talented musicians. And I've been very fortunate. I worked at SF Jazz as their director of education for a number of years and met so many amazing local and national, international musicians through that work. And at InterMusic SF, I've been able to deepen my connection and knowledge of the local music community and really focus in on this group of musicians that by any measure are as good as any musician in any metropolitan you'd compare it to. We are so lucky where we are to have the breadth and depth of talent that we have. So Music Day is probably my favorite. I mean, it's an incredible logistical challenge. It's a giant puzzle that, as you can imagine, scheduling artists, not just the individual artists, but all the artists, musicians they bring, and the 4 stages and the venue and the audiences. It's a full year-long project to organize, but when that comes together, both last year and the broadcast and in previous years where it's been an audience event, to see these performers meet an audience that is so enthusiastic And truly, like many of them have said, it's their most enthusiastic audience they've had a chance to perform in front of. And they get the chance to see the full day of music and meet peers, and the audience feels no pressure to say, if say this isn't my cup of tea, I need to stay for the whole thing or a 3-hour recital. They can just go on to the next venue and check something else out. And so just to see this flow, and at a certain point, once 2 or 3 acts have started, then I can take a breath and just start to relax and say, oh, this works. The machine is working. And then I can just go from venue to venue and enjoy it like a fan. And I see the smiles, I see the audiences. And because it's a combination of performance and networking, you know that all the musicians are definitely bringing their A game, because they don't know quite who they're going to be performing for. It might be, another string quartet that's listening to them play. So everyone really puts in time and energy to just do their very best. And so I've been stunned by some of the performances I've heard over the years that I've been able to do it, and just feel very fortunate to have had the opportunity to organize this festival.
Cory, over this last 10 plus months now, what are you thinking or seeing out there that you feel are some of the things that could be, I hate to use the term good, but perhaps good or productive coming out of the pandemic and our economic meltdown?
I would say innovation. That from the very beginning, I was getting calls from our affiliates and from other musicians and from other arts leaders and funders to say, here's what we can do. And not just thinking about it as a possibility, but moving it into an actuality in an incredibly short amount of time. So in my case, we knew we didn't want to just cancel Music Day outright. So I reached out to the War Memorial, and they partnered with me to find ways to broadcast it. I'm not the only one that did something like that, but the fact that so many people got behind me and said, yeah, we can figure this out. I can help you navigate all the health codes, and here's how to do it. And my affiliates were also finding ways to continue their operations and reach audiences and perform, and of course all online. And at very first, what I was hearing is like, oh, it's not going to be the same. People won't tune in, or people want to be at live. But what we found, and others have found, is that you're reaching a whole other demographic that you might not have if just by doing live and local. We had viewers in Asia and in Europe, and same with our affiliates. They're saying, well, my family in Shanghai has introduced it to 100 other people that would have never been able to hear us. So that's definitely a positive. And then so others have really turned the fundraising potential of this into success, and that if they do Facebook performance, they're really generating some revenue that helps support their operations. So I am very fortunate to say that there have been, at least in our immediate circle, no groups that have just had to throw in the towel. They've had to maybe take a hiatus or do less, but no one has said we can't continue. They're able to apply for support grants and receive support grants, and or get funding through online fundraisers. So I've just seen real ingenuity and perseverance. And also because of this, it's connected the community in a much different way. That sense that all boats rise has really come through for this, I'd say.
And then back to Music Day, it sounds like you're working on the possibility of actually making that show something that people can watch in the future, and if so, also make donations around it.
Yeah, so we recorded our broadcast. It's not on the website right now, but we're going to put it back up in a little bit so people can view the full 5-hour broadcast that we had in October. And then we're looking right now into the spring of 22 in hopes that we can do a blended event, depending on what the health guidelines are for audience in-person events. And fortunately, I'm not the one who has to figure all that out because of the complexities. But when they say, yes, you can do X number of people in a venue, we can hopefully do that. And then in addition, assuming there will be some limitation where we can't just have, standing room only like we normally have, then we're going to broadcast it as well. So reach that audience that maybe found us in this last iteration of it from, wherever they might have been that was outside of the Bay Area. So it adds a layer of expense. And that was something that we learned a lot about this year, like what it means to do a broadcast and to hire technicians and to get the stream going and all these kind of things that I had no experience doing, that, you need to pay people that really know how to do it. Otherwise, there's just so many opportunities. That's what I was thinking, like, What if at 12 o'clock on this broadcast, I press play and nothing happens? It's totally out of my control, but it worked perfectly. It's going to go, and it did. But that's an added expense, of course, that we're still fundraising for, so we can do that. But it's something that we see is really worth it and very important to do.
Well, thank you, Cory, for sharing your work of InterMusicSF today. And we'll make sure that all of our listeners have your contact information, your website, social media, so they can follow InterMusicSF Productions. Hopefully get engaged and support the mission, support the affiliates, and please stay healthy and safe through our strange new normal.
That's right.
Which appears to be hopefully getting a little bit less strange as we get more vaccinations out there. So
seems like it, yeah.
Thanks for being on the show.
I really appreciate you having me.
That's it for this episode of Voices of the Community. You've been listening to the voice of Cory Combs, the Executive Director of InterMusicSF. To find out more about InterMusicSF and support their programs and musical group affiliates, go to intermusicsf.org. Please listen to our interview with Wayne of the Dancers Group in episode 43 to find out more about their support of dancers, and our interview with Schaefer and Rose of Z-Space in episode 12 to find out more about their support for performing artists. We hope that you enjoyed the insights, points of view, and personal stories from the voices of changemakers and their nonprofits and small businesses featured in this series. To find out more and get engaged with the nonprofits, small businesses, and staff members featured in the series, please go to my website, georgecoster.com, and click on Voices of the Community to find links to the extended versions of these interviews and to listen to the entire series. After listening to these stories, we hope that you will consider making a donation and volunteering to provide a hand up to your fellow community members. I want to thank my associate producer, Eric Estrada, and Casey Nance at Citron Studios, along with the wonderful crew at the San Francisco Public Press and KSFP. Voices of the Community is a member of Intersection for the Arts, which allows us to offer you a tax deduction for your contributions. Please go to georgecoster.com and click on the donate link to make a donation to help us provide future shows just like this one. While you're on our website, you can enjoy our archived past shows, which feature community voices working on solutions to critical issues facing Northern California communities. And you can sign up for our newsletter to find out more about future shows, as well as shows and events from the organizations that are included in our episodes. Take us along on your next COVID walk by subscribing to Voices of the Community on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and Google Podcast, or wherever you get your podcast. You can follow us on Twitter at George Coster, and we'd love to hear from you with feedback and show ideas, so send us an email to george@georgecoster.com. I'm George Coster in San Francisco, and thank you for listening.